Thank you, Cindy. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Castagna Lacet, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work and an OTL fellow. And I'm happy to be joined by Donna Schiavo from the BSU Counseling Center, Wellness Center. And we're happy to be able to talk to all of you today about student mental health and really mental well-being, and how that is impacted by current events, as well as all of the ways in which we might be supportive to our students. And I'll give Donna a chance to introduce herself as well. But just to say that today, what we will be discussing, we'll kind of frame the issue a little bit, and Donna and I will talk a little bit back and forth with one another to frame the issue for you, but then also be able to talk about identifying strategies and some resources. And then we'll open for more discussion. So what we will ask, because the session is being recorded, if folks wanted to type your questions or comments in the chat, we can moderate that and address the questions and have a discussion there, so that if you do have more specific questions or questions that you may feel nervous about asking on camera, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. That way we can still be able to address anything that you would like to have addressed. Donna?
Hi, I'm Donna Schiavo. As Castagna said, I am the clinical director of counseling services at the Wellness Center. And I've been at Bridgewater since 2008 and been the director for just over a year. So I think I've had the opportunity to see students and their kind of mental health profiles change over the course of time. So we'll be able to speak a little bit about what we're seeing now compared to what we were seeing, maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago even. And so like Castagna said, we'll be going back and forth a little bit of an interview style, and then we'll try to be mindful of what's happening in the chat as well.
Great, thank you. So let's jump right in, and Donna, if you can maybe talk a little bit about how do you see student mental health concerns showing up in their courses about their engagement or with their assignments. You and your staff at the Wellness Center talk to a lot of our students in ways that faculty may not be. So how do they say it's showing up, their mental health concerns?
Well, right now, let me just give you a little bit of a profile of the student population that we're seeing this semester. We have about 86% of the people who come to use our services are between 18 and 22. And we're having a reduction in people coming to services. We weren't able to predict that. We thought we'd have an increase, I guess, because of hearing nationwide how mental health was really going to be a key issue for people, especially with the pandemic. And so we've had about a 48% decrease over last year. So the same, August through November, if I look at our data that we collect, we've seen fewer students. The students we are seeing, though, are presenting with a higher acuity and a higher kind of level of anxiety than we've seen before. And right now, the top presenting issues are anxiety, depressed mood, interpersonal concerns or issues with relationships, and then lastly, academic functioning. So these are by self-report. So the students, when they come in, they fill out some paperwork for us with their chief complaints, and these 4 are the top. We have seen anxiety and depression consistently, and interpersonal issues consistently over probably the past 5 years, coming up routinely as the chief complaint. But a high percentage of students are coming in with prior mental health or mental illness histories. And so they've already received counseling in the past, and they're hoping to continue counseling when they get to us. And so those who are calling are really looking to set up, for the most part, individual psychotherapy sessions and counseling. They're not really just calling for information. They're not just calling because they're worried about a friend. They're actually calling to get involved with counseling. So that's also a change. We're seeing, the stigma. I'm happy to say that the stigma has reduced quite a bit, but people aren't in any way coming in feeling like they're not sure about counseling. They're coming in right now saying, I definitely want counseling. So with the anxiety and depressed mood and interpersonal relationships, I think we're hearing specifically regarding academics that there's a lot of worry about this semester and then going into next semester. What is this going to do to my GPA? What is this whole online learning going to do to my kind of chances of getting into graduate school or getting into the research I want to do? And so there's quite a lot of anxiety, not so much just generalized anxiety, but really specifically about their academic performance and whether they're going to be able to persist and stick it out. And then whether this is going to happen again, next semester, which in fact it is. So, people were learning that. And we did have an increase in calls the weeks when anything big that goes out, whether it's an announcement about financial aid or scholarships or housing deposits, we do see a little bit of a spike in people reaching out for services.
Wow, that's really surprising in some ways to hear that there's been such a dramatic decrease in the number of folks seeking and using services. But in many ways, it's also not surprising given some of the um, issues that are presenting, such as depression and anxiety, which makes it harder to want to reach out. And the fact that we're remote now. So a lot of students may not even really think that they can reach out right now, right? I can say from my own students in my classes, I have many students who, when I tell them that the wellness center and everything else is still in operation, they're not so sure. They're like, really? Well, I'm not really sure what that would be like, right? And feeling nervous about taking that next step of making that phone call. And yet, what I've seen in my own classes, both synchronous and asynchronous classes, are students who lose engagement. They're not posting, they're not showing up to the classes that are synchronous. They're not handing in work. They're not participating. Some of them are nervous about even being on camera and have heightened anxiety about being on camera with so many faces looking back at them. And I've had conversations with students about this. So I think that many of the faculty have also wondered, well, if students are having these concerns, why don't they seek accommodations for this? Because then if they have accommodations, then that's fine. We can figure it out. But what am I supposed to do if they don't have accommodations? So can you say just perhaps, is it an easy, thing to get accommodations for these anxieties and for, this depression? Is it something that you recommend for students? Is it realistic? Is it something that we might just be able to work with the students?
Yeah, it is important to differentiate. And I see there are a few people on the call who probably have a lot more to say about accommodations and how that process is. But to your point, there is sometimes a person who's experiencing anxiety and it doesn't reach the level of something that can be, let's say, diagnosed. It doesn't meet diagnostic criteria in the systems that we use to diagnose people. And so in order to have accommodations, a person does need to meet a certain threshold and have something that is diagnosed, which means it persists. It may be over a period of 2 weeks or longer, and it may interfere with multiple facets of an individual's, life. And sometimes that's not the case, but other times we do have someone who has a long-standing problem with depression, anxiety, a learning style need, ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, things that people really have had experiences with for a chunk of time. And so they may already have documentation that they would need to go forward and have accommodations. And then there are also kind of accommodations you can make without actual documented disability accommodation kinds of things. So if you're able to have a conversation with a student, you may get a little bit more information about their history. You may learn that they have had accommodations through high school, and maybe, depending on a school system, they were no longer on an IEP. And so they feel like, well, I'm all set now. And then it's sometimes our job in counseling, or your jobs, to sort of let them know, okay, well, attention deficit disorder doesn't magically go away because you're no longer in high school. It's just maybe that you were no longer on an IEP in your high school, but maybe you should talk with someone here. It is kind of a topic that you have to broach gently and thoughtfully, I think, because a person may feel, I'm just guessing based on some stories I've heard from students, they may feel like, well, I don't have a mental illness, and this is all because of online learning, and this is because of COVID, and I have some things that are really going on, but I don't know that it is something that I need longstanding accommodations for. And so I think that highlights the part where, asking a person and talking with a person, there's nothing that beats just kind of having a conversation to figure out, well, where's this person at?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I've had so many of my students being impacted by COVID, either because they themselves might have contracted it, or they have people in their circle of friends or family who have contracted it, or they're just really scared that they might get it, or somebody that they care about might get it and may die from it. I've also had students really anxious, about the issues of racial justice that have been happening across the country, and have been really heightened in the last several months, and the pandemic has really shown a lot of the systemic issues, and so people are legitimately more anxious and nervous and afraid. And then, of course, students who were not used to doing online learning, didn't really think about doing online learning, probably would never have chosen to take 6 online classes, and now find themselves in the midst of doing that and are not sure, how to proceed, and feel disconnected even from their instructors to say, I'm drowning in this, or I need help, and aren't sure that they even should try to connect to their instructors, and not knowing what their instructors might, be able to do, right? So it's interesting to talk about, the major mental illness and all of those things, but a lot of our students right now, it's not so much major mental illness that is keeping them from being able to succeed in their classes or even be retained at the university. It's these issues that's impacting everybody, including us as faculty, right? And us as staff people and administrators. Everyone is impacted by these larger events and situations. So, my question is, and I think that maybe other faculty may be wondering, so, if you do have students in your class who are showing signs of distress, and maybe you might notice that because they're not handing in assignments, or they're not wanting to appear on camera and they haven't talked to you about it, or they've been missing classes or something like that. How do we have this conversation, or even think about wellness, more so than, are you suffering from a mental illness or mental disorder? How might faculty approach that? What are some of the strategies or even resources that folks might look to?
I think there also have been, I think, another Office of Teaching and Learning experience included some of those ways in which people could reach out. And there were some wonderful examples given, such as, polling the class just saying, how's everyone doing today in the chat? Put a word, what word comes to mind, or even a numeric, or that kind of thing. But really being able to have set the stage for an open, honest conversation early on, so that people know that you're approachable, they're aware of your office hours, they're okay with, being able to email you, or, they need to hear from you, I think, what's acceptable for you. And that's one of the things we do here. I'm not sure if I should email my professor about this. We're forever encouraging, as far as counselors go, encouraging open communication, so one of the first questions I ask when I'm asking about academic performance or anxiety is, are you communicating with your professor around this? No, actually, I just stopped going to class. I haven't been in 3 weeks. Okay, well, let's talk about what that might be like. What could we do so that you can inform your professor that you are houseless right now, and that you are sleeping on a couple of different friends' couches, or any number of things, or seeing therapists in their car. So we're seeing, I know I'm just jumping off to another topic, but we see many students who are meeting us in their cars because their home lives are not conducive to doing counseling sessions. So they'll be in a parking lot of a mall meeting me in the car, which is fine. But I think that just speaks to the sometimes disorganized lifestyles that people are forced to live when they're juggling school and family and work, and maybe caring for a loved one. Those kinds of things are going on. So I think being able, back to my original point, if you can set the stage for open dialogue early on, when we're thinking about next semester, just really be clear about guidelines on how to reach you, when to reach you, what's acceptable and what's not. Because I've also heard students say things like, I've emailed my professor 10 times and I'm not getting anything back. But, I don't know if that's what was set up ahead of time. Maybe the professor is not open to receiving emails and is not going to engage in this kind of conversation that way. So, I think there's something you can say in the beginning of class that acknowledges and validates that this is a very tough time. And therefore, if you need me, here's how you can reach me. Here are the hours during which you can reach me. And here's the best mode of communication for us to talk about these things. So that there's no confusion. I think sometimes students will not act because they don't know what to do. So it's good to just be very explicit, whether that's in a syllabus or just in some other format when you have the first class.
Right. So I think that the transparency is definitely something that students and instructors would benefit with having more transparency and communication. I think it also may be scary to some of the instructors, who don't want to necessarily open a Pandora box by saying, tell me how you're doing or how you're handling this, because they may be afraid that something really scary is going to be said, and then what do you do? If you're not in the counselor department or in the social work department, you may even be more heightenedly afraid of asking questions that might give you answers that you're not prepared for. And is that a realistic fear on the parts of instructors?
I think it absolutely is. And that's why it's always very individualized, what you as an individual feel comfortable with, and what's comfortable for you given your role with the student, and knowing that even if you have an in-depth, very open and honest conversation, you still have to lecture to them, the following day or the next week, so that we can get caught in these moments where we really want to help. And then it's hard to sometimes reel that back in and not have a student who's then emailing you at 10 p.m. or, looking for more from you, in which case at that point, then there may be some shame for the student when you say, look, I can't do this anymore. And I know that it's challenging to pull back out once you've gotten in. So for sure, that's a consideration, is to figure out what's okay for you and what are you comfortable with. And then I think it's also appropriate to say, here's what I'm seeing. So sometimes we ask what's going on, but many times it's just as helpful to say, here's what I see. You used to come to class making good eye contact with the camera, and now you've got your hood on, or the camera's going in and out. I don't, you turn it off, you turn it on. Your assignments are routinely late. You're maybe more irritable when we do discussions. Your posts on the online discussion board are really sparse, or I haven't seen any action from you. So that when you're able to say, here's what I'm seeing, it really can open up a nice dialogue, because maybe the student was not even aware that that's how they were presenting to you or to classmates, because they're not next to you anymore. So they lose that incidental contact, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really very very true in my experience as well. The fact that we're not, walking back to the office together, or walking from one building to another, where some of that small talk might have happened. I know sometimes I check in with students before class or immediately after class online, to just say, how are you doing? Or, you seem a little distracted today. I also use Zoom, and I'll use a private chat, to say to a student, are you okay? I'm not seeing you. Or, you look kind of distant, or you look really tired. Are you okay? Is everything okay? And I also, use that as an opportunity to ask them if I can make a referral for them, because I've become more and more aware of some of the resources that are available for students, at BSU, that, as I said earlier, sometimes they really think, aren't happening anymore, that, because we are online, that they can't still seek services, or they can't get help for being homeless. Well, what is anybody going to do for me now that I've lost my housing? They're not even sure that they can get help for that. I've also had students taking class in their cars, and in parking lots, because they don't have, Wi-Fi, or because they're homeless, or because their home situation isn't conducive to being on camera with their, siblings or children or whomever, in the background, or just how they might be living. And they don't know that that's something that, the faculty know anything about, or know how to help, or have access to resources, or maybe even care about, in their personal lives. But the resources do exist. And I think that we as faculty do care. We care about the wellness of our students, and we care about keeping them safe, but also keeping them coming to class and doing well, retaining them, at the university. And so I guess my next question would be, if we could talk about what some of those resources are that a faculty person who may not want to have, jump in with both feet into a deep conversation about what's happening with a student, but, where can they tell the student to go, or who can they reach out to on behalf of the student?
Right away, I can think of telling a student about counseling services, informing a student about the Academic Achievement Center. And those are two things normally when we're in person, we've actually had people walk students down and say, here, it's, it's a friendly place. I won't go in with you, but here it is. There's the front desk. And that can be a nice handoff, and the student can feel comforted. And then, it's important to check back in. How did that go? I think that's the other key piece, is to check back in with the student once we do refer them someplace. And then in addition to that, if a student's not really feeling like counseling was where it's at, there's the care team. And that maybe Cindy or someone can put that link in. Most people, I think, know about the care team, but that multidisciplinary team really does help assess students' risk, and then decide what would be the best avenue. And there's some outreach done, so the student is contacted by someone from the care team. And in some cases, that's all the student needs. So maybe the person has been having trouble financially and has an ill relative and is, struggling with dropping a class because it will affect financial aid. And, there's a whole host of things going on. And And many of these are environmental stressors, perhaps. And so a care team referral, although sometimes a student could experience that as punitive or like you're reporting me, by and large, that's not the case, especially when it's made clear to the student, look, these people can help you. These people can help you financially figure things out. You can meet with a case manager. They can help you figure out which offices on our campus or off campus would be helpful for you. So I think those are the kind of three areas that I would refer students to. And then I, like I said, to check back in and say, so how'd that go? You know, after a couple of weeks, did you get what you felt you needed? And is there anything else I can do?
Mhm. I like that idea of the, you know, the warm handoff, right? So that you're not just saying, go there, you know, call this number, but making that referral and even asking for the permission to make the referral, letting them know that that's happening, you know, preserves that relationship. And it doesn't necessarily put the faculty in the mix, you know. I've had the experience, you know, when we were on campus, of physically walking a student to the wellness center, you know, and that was a physical warm handoff, right? Now I've had the experience of putting in a private chat to a student that I'd like to, you know, have somebody from the student engagement team contact them. And, you know, what's been wonderful this semester is getting that weekly email on a Tuesday or Wednesday, you know, from Rita Miller's office, and saying, you know, if you have a student who's not the same way engaged, you know, here's a form that you can fill out to have somebody reach out to them. And I've had to do that probably a dozen times this semester, because I've had students with a variety of things come up, from, you know, housing to just needing resources. And the form is super easy, actually. Probably the hardest part of it is that you need the student's ID number, and I had to go back into my Web for Faculty to look that up. You know, but that probably wouldn't have kept, you know, the process from going forward, you know, to make that referral.
Yeah, and I think that students really do perceive that as being supportive and looking out for them. And so once you get over the initial, you know, doing it once, like Dr. Lacet said, you can do it again and again and realize, oh, actually, this is going somewhere. And they've had a wonderful kind of case resolution percentage, so that those people, so, you know, someone reached out to them and whatever was going on, they've assisted them and it's been resolved. So I think with care team reports too, if it's not psychiatric or psychological in nature, there's still other people who can help. So it's good to know that it doesn't have to be an actual crisis. It's probably nicer when it's not, because it's easier to reverse course.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, the other thing, we've been talking a lot about noticing things about students, and you can notice things a lot more in synchronous classes, but we also have an overwhelming amount of classes that are asynchronous. And so, you know, I also teach some asynchronous sessions, and in looking at my students' work, that gives me that same feeling sometimes of something's maybe not quite right. I've also engaged students in activities such as, you know, having them make a short video to post or something like that, where at least I can feel like I'm putting eyes on them, and I do the same. I make some videos so that they see me, and they can feel like they are connected to me, or that they can reach out to me because of that. Having those office hours, even for the asynchronous courses, you know, or a drop-in time or something that invites people. But again, when you have students who are feeling anxiety or depression, the inclination is to disengage, right? And so, do you have any other thoughts about ways in which we might reach out and reach in even more?
That's a tough one. I think some of this is really understanding that this is neurologic lots of times. It's almost a trauma. It, in many cases, in fact, is a trauma response. And there is a traumatic thread that's running through all of our lives right now. And for some students with prior histories of trauma, or students who were in a foster care system, or students who have, who are veterans, or Black and Indigenous people of color, students who are experiencing poverty. There's so many things that are already traumatic, and then add a pandemic on top of that. And so there's some of this that's not necessarily a choice. So when a person sort of slips away and becomes, isolative, in fact, they're already physically isolated, and then you find emotionally there's isolation that takes place. I think it's important to just recognize that there's this trauma. And by that, by pointing that out, it's good to know that sometimes a student, isn't doing this because they don't respect the class or don't want to be successful. And I think sometimes students feel like if they ask for help, they're going to be perceived as that. And they see all of you instructors and faculty members, and you're in a real position of power and control for them. And that dynamic can be a challenge, and especially a challenge for someone who's undergone any kind of a trauma. So, I'd like for there to be something that you can do, that I could say, that would help reach in and extract them. But sometimes it's really about validating and listening and being there and being present. And I love the idea of having videos or having some of the asynchronous coursework, have a place for you to see them sometimes with their recording something, because you're going to see their mental health concerns showing up in their work or their lack of work, or, any type of change from what their baseline level is. If you have someone who's always late and never turned anything in and was always sort of an iffy participator, and they still do that, that's not as big of a concern as someone who you've seen really decline. So any kind of pattern of atypical behavior is concerning. And I guess just reminding them that you're here for them, and that you're hoping that they can be successful, and asking about what you might be able to do. And then be prepared to back it up. So of course you don't want to ask that if you really feel like yourself, you may be checked out. And I think we have to be really frank about that too. That's true, is that some of, we have good days and bad days just like our students. And sometimes the last thing you want to do is invite a student to have a conversation with you about what's going on emotionally, because you want to be able to back it up, and you might not be there that day. Right. So that's important too. But there are other resources, and some of that, means just directing them to the Wellness Center webpage and saying, look over here. There's a lot of things there. We have a couple of new offerings this semester. We have Together All and WellTrack. Those are two things I've been plugging everywhere I go. And Together All is a peer-to-peer, 24/7 clinically monitored support network where students can feel and experience that group kind of experience that they don't get since they're online learning. And the good thing about that is, it's, if a person is typing something of concern, there are wall monitors, they're called, and the person will be, someone will reach out to them from the Together All platform and talk with them. And it's tied right into our emergency call system as well, so that a student can receive whatever help they need. And then WellTrack is a mobile app that I would encourage people to at least talk to their classes about, because it has a mood tracking function, and it teaches students about cognitive behavioral therapy style, kind of identifying your triggers and your thoughts, and journaling. And then there are brief introduction videos about anxiety and depression. And so it's a wonderful little self-help platform, and it's free of charge for Bridgewater State students this year. So I would say really WellTrack and Together All both are being funded this year for students, and I hope next year as well, and free of charge. And I think just directing them to our website where they can link into these things and register with their Bridgewater University emails.
That's awesome. That's something that we can post on our Blackboard sites, maybe even make a short video invitation to students to to go and visit these sites and download the apps. And that's really awesome that that's available to our students. And, Donna, when you were saying, that maybe some of us too are stressed and, might be checked out or whatever, it's a real thing. We also need to, find support for ourselves and support for, what we might be juggling at this time during, these very trying times, right? Um, and some of that might be, for emotional reasons, but also, I think most of the people that I've talked to have felt like, I think I'm failing at teaching right now. I'm not doing as great of a job, or I'm really nervous about, whether or not I'm reaching my students or keeping them engaged in, my discipline or any of that. And it can feel like we're failing too, right? And so I think it's important for us to be thinking about our emotional wellness as well as our students, but also thinking about ways to get resources for ourselves, whether that is through the Office of Teaching and Learning or through the TTC, for ways to be better, with our engagement with our students and feel better about our teaching during these times where a lot of us are doing things that we're not used to doing in ways that we're not used to delivering our materials. So I think all of those things are really important.
That's a great point. I just asked just a couple of students to look at that mentally for themselves. I said, how do you think, your professor feels right now? And I think sometimes that perspective taking can be really useful. And I said, this person probably isn't happy with having to teach this concept over Zoom either, just as happy as you're not, just as unhappy as you are about having to try to learn it this way. So, and the person said, oh, I never actually thought of that. Yeah. Okay. So maybe I won't go so hard on them. So that, I think perspective taking can go a long way too. So that was a good point. Thanks.
And it's an interesting thing, we, I think, are used to having certain boundaries. And I think now with, Zooming, in our houses, in our kitchens, in our, cars or wherever, both students and faculty and staff meeting with students, we're having a window into each other's lives that we normally would not, right? And that in itself is stressful. And I think that, those of us who are faculty and have, families and people in the background can attest to feeling a little stressed about, okay, is somebody going to suddenly, show up and say like, we're out of milk, and throw a tantrum, right in the middle of your class. These are some of the real fears and concerns that our students also have when they're not necessarily in control of their environment, right? And we may have the privilege often to be more in control of our environments than maybe our students do. Maybe they don't have the privilege of controlling their environments because, they're living with parents or they're living with roommates or they, need to go to this public space in order to use Wi-Fi, and that comes down to a lot of different factors of, how we might be more privileged than our students in many respects. So I do want to give a chance if there was any comments or questions that came up in the chat that anyone had, or if there's anything that is ruminating for someone, if you want to put that in the chat, if there's something that we might address for you. So there's great information there in the chat about the apps that Donna mentioned, as well as information about the food pantry and some of the other needs that could be provided for our students. And again, just reminding folks about the, accessing the Wellness Center, letting our students know that the Wellness Center is still in operation, and that we are also still in operation, that we are also here and available for them is an important thing. Letting them see us as individuals as well, and being transparent with when we might be available and in what ways we might be able to help. Definitely making a plug for the care team and for the student engagement referrals that go out, and I can attest to the fact that even when you're sending a whole bunch of them, I haven't received an email yet saying, Castagna, please stop. So I think it's okay to keep doing it, and I feel very confident that it's been so helpful to some of my students, and that they've really been appreciative of it, and that it has impacted their ability to stay engaged in the class, which ultimately, will result in retention of our students and their overall wellness.
Regarding the question about problem solving and resiliency, I think we did touch on a little bit of just validating the fact that this is a hard time. I think it can feel scary perhaps to validate it, because it may seem like it could open the door to, now this is an excuse for lax behavior or not contributing to the class or what have you. And I think that that's not going to happen. I think most of the time students want to know that that this is hard, just so that it's out there and that that's articulated and that's clear, and that maybe there's a way to build in some self-care. I know that's kind of the buzzword right now, so I almost cringe when I'm saying it, but really wellness is what we're talking about. And how are you getting sleep? Are you eating? Are you drinking water? Your basic needs, are they being met? And if not, what can we do about that? And maybe there's a way to build that in to your class discussions sometimes, especially when you see everyone's looking a little ragged, which, I think that kind of ebbs and flows as well. And, maybe there's 3 people in your class when there's usually 10 people in your class, and people just start to disappear. But to be able to check in with, okay, everybody. So I know normally we're going to be talking about, Britlit, but instead let's just check in right now. How many people didn't read last night, and why? Or how late were you up? And everyone looks really tired. And I think that goes a really long way, just so that it's like an acknowledgement that, yes, we're in this situation together and I see you. And being seen is really important in that kind of way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to also add that, being attuned to our students and their wellness doesn't mean that we have to give up academic rigor. It doesn't mean that we change the rules. I definitely have been more flexible with certain things, particularly, an assignment was due on, I routinely have my assignments all due on Sunday night. That way it's more predictable for the students and they know. Or if it's a posting, they have their initial post on Tuesdays and follow post by Sunday. And if I have a student who, let's say there's a paper due on Sunday and they say, I'm just not able to get it in. Can I get it in, on Tuesday? Then I think for myself, how much flexibility I need in my life right now. And I say to myself, realistically, am I grading those papers between Sunday and Tuesday? No, I'm not. And so, I'm not going to get to it between now and Tuesday. And then I say to them, is it realistic for you to get it to me on Tuesday, or do you need it until Thursday? And that would be okay, because I know that I also need flexibility, and and I'm not necessarily doing or having the same experiences as some of my students, and vice versa. So you don't have to lose rigor to have some flexibility and to offer that additional support in ways that are realistic, or that are just, you don't lose anything in doing it, right? So it's not making, the quiz worth less or anything like that, but maybe looking into what might be a better way to give this material and to assess this material. Speaking of flexibility, you can hear my toddler in the background there. Did we miss anything else from the chat?
I think you got everything I've been looking forward to.
Okay, cool. I think we can wrap up. And thank everyone for coming and for participating, for adding so much to the chat as well. I think that everything that got into the chat also got said out loud. So this will be available for those who will watch this video wherever it's going to live on the web. So I do want to thank Donna for coming on and talking with me on behalf of OTL, to talk about student mental health, but student wellness and our own wellness as a community.
Definitely.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Thanks to Donna and Castagna. This was a great conversation. I want to encourage everyone on the call that if you have further thoughts about ways we can explore this topic, both now and into next semester, please feel free to email us at otl@bridgew.edu with your ideas for future conversations or ways we can best support faculty in this very important topic. Thank you all so much for being here today, and we will see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.